Oh, this is gonna be good. What's going on?
Hey, I finally caught you. Usually
You did?
yeah, yeah, I never get your notifications, but I was like clicking on YouTube and it said Preterist live. And I was like, oh God, gotta click on it.
I am
Gotta
live,
support
yes.
the boy. Oh, we're going in straight into the debar. I'm with you.
Okay. So what did you want to bring to the table on full preterism?
Oh man, I have to be in like the aggressive debatey tone for this. I guess
No,
I can.
not really. But
I guess
it is in the
maybe
spirit
I
of
can do it in a way of like asking questions about things that seem to indicate not full preterism or something?
you know what?
Or
Yeah,
how do you
let's start with this actually. I want to start with
how
this.
do you okay, you start.
Yeah, I want to start with this real quick. So I saw you on Praise I Am's channel the other night after I had talked to that Asian Christian guy, which was a disaster for him. I don't know if you saw. Well, you did see. You were in there. You heard the conversation we were having. Um,
Well,
where
I kinda tune out,
he-
like, his whole manner of speech and his I just can't listen to it really.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was bad. I was asking him very simple questions that he could not answer, and it's just funny because then I leave. And when I leave, everybody hops in. They're like, "Don't worry, buddy. You did great. You totally schooled him." I'm like, they're just goofy over there. Sometimes it's just not worth it. So I saw that you did talk to Praise after though, and they wanted to practice their gospelizing on you. Howdy, did it work? Are you a believer in Jesus now?
Nope. But,
Oh, that's too bad.
well, I didn't wanna be because I know how quickly they can turn up the
Oh yeah.
heat, so I was like I tried to be as passive as possible, but I can't say like, "Okay, I accept," but so I had to really couch everything. I was, like, in a awkward position because I didn't want the heat because they were kinda really nice to me, so I didn't wanna
Yeah,
turn it.
yeah. They had no idea that you had no intention of believing in Jesus, but you were
What do you
being
mean I have
coy.
no intention? I do have
No, at that
intention.
time, that night, you didn't.
No,
I
I
don't think
did
you.
if they would present something, I just didn't think, like, the historical
I
case
think.
is like a fact of history, resurrection is, very
Yeah.
convincing. But to be fair, I haven't done my research and dug into that as deeply as I could have. I just took it on, like, an obvious like, it would be, like, a agreed upon historical fact. Because then, like
You know what I think?
anyways.
You want my two
What
cents on it?
yeah.
I think you knew that they wouldn't tell you anything that would convince you. I think you went into it knowing that they were going to fail, personally. But all right, so let's talk about uh yeah, if you want to talk about like preterism, ask some questions to kind of, field it out, so to speak, see what we can come up with and see if it passed the sniff test for howdy.
Yeah, how do you think what do you think? Because you're, like, the preterist expert, what do you think is the most fruitful direction to either lead to preterism or to go to the points of contention of preterism? Is it like a specific
Um,
verse?
well, I mean, yeah, there's verses, but I think it's more the overall like what is the philosophical, if I could use that word, or you know, yeah, I guess I would use the word. What's the philosophy behind full preterism is the important question, right? Because any in my purview and in my experience, any other view of Christianity fails to be able to get onto the same level as an atheist or an agnostic or somebody who is a huge critic. Like even Muslims or Jews will say Christianity fails, but they have their own religion and their own God and stuff like that. But full preterism is the only denomination, quote unquote, that can get into that same level and I believe um, provide an answer for the question that that maybe the skeptic or the agnostic or the atheist has. So for example, let me just kind of throw it out there for you. Um, you are like, hey, how do we know God exists, right? If I wasn't there for the crucifixion, and there's not really very many accounts of Jesus rising from the dead, except for the Gospels, which in your view or in your thought process, would you say that the Gospels exist in a vacuum, i.e., they're only in the Bible because they support the Bible narrative?
Are the Gospels in the Bible because they support the Bible narrative? I think the Gospels are in the Bible because of the canonization of one of the councils in, like, the 5th or the
Mhm.
4th century.
Okay, so they looked. So do you feel that they looked at those gospels and said, "Hey, this is actually it's a good argument for Jesus because it's got the resurrection in there, and that's how we know Jesus and God are real." Like, do you think that's kind of was the baseline for it? I can't hear you if you're talking, by the way. I think your microphone died. Howdy. And we lost them.
You
So,
there? Sorry,
oh,
I
there
was
you are.
like, I cut out, so you're sorry, can you ask that again?
Yeah, no, you're good. So like the council that they had where they looked at the gospels and they said, okay, we're going to canonize this. Would you agree that the baseline fundamental reason why they said we're going to canonize these is because they saw that there was the accounts of Christ's death, burial, and resurrection, and so these people in the council said, well, there you go, that definitely supports our belief that God is real and Jesus Christ was a real man that rose from the dead.
No, I think generally they just went on a lot of, precedents. So, like, things that were attested to by people closer and closer to that time. Um, just generally how even, secular scholars would sort of do these types of historical things, like, I mean, they weren't too deep into, like, I mean, they did do textual analysis, so if something said something crazy, they wouldn't put it in. But there
Hmm.
were questions, like, some things they had to make decisions on things that were, conceivably scriptural, so but yeah,
But is it
mostly a lot
true?
of,
I guess is the big question, right? That's the question. Like, are the words written on the page true?
well, the question is, like, how do they go about determining that? And I think a lot of it
Right.
came to, what is the word? Inertia. Like, a lot of things were, like, pretty much, agreed upon, like, a lot of people were passing around the same sorts of things, and,
Mm.
I mean, they only formed the canon in response to some lunatic, like, it wasn't even, like, a set up thing, but to determine the truth, I mean, I don't think they, like, went and did, like, archaeology or, like, went and did interviews. They were just, looking at what people earlier had said, so, like, what their teachers had said, what their teachers had said, and for,
Interesting.
like, stuff that might have gone in or might have not, I mean, generally, they would do, like, systematic theology, like, "Oh, this is, like, Gnostic heresy."
Interesting. So, I guess like if I look at it as like, okay, if I were a critical thinker about the canonization, like you said, it was inertia, right? They're like, okay, we've got to figure out a way to make sure that the words on the page are true, but there could be bias, right? So they could be like, well, we want the words on these pages to be true, and so we're going to include them in the book because this definitely is a good narrative, and in our you know our biased view, it's great evidence for Jesus's death, burial, and resurrection, and therefore God being real, right? Like, would you say that that might be a possibility? If like I'm talking coming from a pretty liberal, critical, scholarly standpoint.
Well, I mean, I think obviously they all had the presupposition that God existed. That'd be insane to say that they're putting this together under the assumption that he didn't. But
Mhm.
in terms of like canon, I mean, different churches had different canons, like Marcion, and then a bunch of Gnostic churches. I mean, a lot of this got settled through violence and stuff. So it
Oh
wasn't.
yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that's all it was, but I'm just saying like there were. I mean, even now there's differences in the canon. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that we've talked about this before. You know, you when you go by the dating of some of these manuscripts that they've found, I think you tend to lean more towards what liberal scholars would say, because a lot of liberal scholars will date um, these epistles that were written in the New Testament as like pretty old in the timeline in like the 80s and 90s and stuff like that after, Jerusalem was destroyed. But let's talk about the Old Testament. Um, a lot of agnostics that I've talked to, and I don't know if you fall in this camp, have said that, well, the Old Testament was just written while Israel was under Babylonian captivity as like propaganda piece, right? To make people think like, oh no, they weren't really that bad off while they're under the Babylonian rule or whatever. They're exiled to Babylon. Um, what do you take as like for the dating of like the Old Testament uh manuscripts?
I mean, pretty old, like 600 to 1,000. I mean, I
Okay.
haven't looked at all this stuff, but yeah, pretty old.
Okay. Yeah. Well, okay. That's Hey, I'll take that. If you think there's a possibility that they could even go back to 1,000 BC, I'd like to know which books you would say go back to 1,000. And the reason why I ask this, Howdy, is because when it comes to belief, right, faithing, as the Debar puts it, I think that evidence could be provided for prophecy coming to pass. That's what I
Oh
think.
yeah, oh yeah, the prophetic. I mean, they sort of went into that too, but yeah, there's a lot of consonancy for sure.
Right.
Prophetic stuff. So yeah, like if there was a lot of prophecy that got fulfilled, that'd be quite convincing.
Right, exactly. So that's the big contention. Why I think preterism is so important is because, in my purview, Genesis 1:1 is talking about what was going to happen in AD 70. So all the way back then, at the beginning of the Bible, let's say it was written in 1000 BC, let's just put the oldest date that you're comfortable with on it. That is God saying, "This is what I'm going to do." Right? That's my personal purview on why preterism is important. Because if we can look at that and then say from there that after 1,070 years, what God said was going to happen happened, that's like what's the what's the mathematical odds, I guess, of that just being some random scribble on a page over 1,000 years, you know, in the past, and then it comes to pass over 1,000 years later. What, like, you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, but if I mean, a lot of these prophecies are so, general and not that specific to where you could put it to lots of different things. Like
Maybe,
if it
maybe.
okay, let me give you an example. If it's on in 70 AD, Titus will enter the second
Right,
Jerusalem temple, destroy it in response to the Bar Kokhba rebellion. I would be on my hands and knees like in an instant. You know
right.
what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And that is the whole thing about it, is when prophecy is being written, it is very much in a metaphoric kind of poetic way, like it's a poetic uh language that, you're right, you could look at it if you're somebody who was a uh I guess I would say agnostic, right? Because that's what you would claim yourself to be, and you're like, hey, that's just not, it's not scratching the itch, right? Because it could apply to a million different things. But that's when we get down to the time statements that are used in some of the other books of the Bible. Like, for example, Deuteronomy 32. I don't know how old you place Deuteronomy 32 to have been written, but archaeological evidence states that Deuteronomy 32 and Judges chapter 5 are written in like a Paleo Hebrew. So like a super old Hebrew. So these can like kind of be vetted out to be really old texts within the Bible. But Deuteronomy 32 is talking about, again, in my purview, AD 70, right? The Song of Moses is all about Israel, the people of Israel, the bloodline people of Israel, losing their temple. And now that relationship that they had with God, that temple stood for, is now part of every nation. So I look at that and I'm like, well, that was written a long time ago. And then we've got affirmations of that. Okay. Like in Luke 21:22, all of it discourse, Christ says, these be the days of vengeance to fulfill all things having been written. But when he's referencing the days of vengeance, he's referencing back to Deuteronomy 32. Right. So to me, it's like, okay, were they really just guessing and saying, hey, we hope that this comes to pass? Or is there like some real authority here being spoken by Christ, right? When he's telling these people in the year, 28 or 29 AD, hey, this stuff that was written about a long time ago, it's going to happen to you. And I think that's what makes preterism important, because it helps bridge that gap that futurism can't. So what do you think on that? You tell me.
Yeah, I mean, that would be in your favor if you could say it fulfills more prophecy in order to answer, like, the skeptical questions. I would grant that as, like, a benefit if that were the case, sure. I'm on board. You're speaking sense. Oh, am I cutting out again?
I'm so sorry. My wife just called me. You said that it would be in my favor if,
Yeah, if your version fulfills more prophecies, that's would seemingly be in your benefit, at least
yeah,
for,
correct.
like, skeptical stuff, for sure.
Correct. Yeah. So that's the baseline approach that I take for why preterism is important. Like there are atheists that say, well, they understand the concept of the New Testament. They'll be like, hey man, Jesus said he was going to return to those people 2,000 years ago to destroy the world. So like they understand what Jesus was saying and what his time statements mean, but they misapply it as being literal, right? The heavens and earth passing away being talking about um like the physical creation, whereas as a as a preterist, we're like, well, no, he wasn't talking about physical creation. He was talking about the way that God was worshipped, right? God was worshipped by Israel in a certain way that represented the heavens and the earth. He said that's going to go away. And it did happen in that generation. Within 40 years, that temple fell, and that was the mark of the new covenant being instilled. Paul talks about this, and that's why I try to stay in Paul as much as I can, because those epistles are universally agreed as being written prior to AD 70. I don't think I know of any contention on Paul's epistles being written post AD 70. And so when we look at Paul's timing statements and everything Paul is talking about, it's jiving completely with what Christ was talking about, that generation seeing everything come to pass. And so my question would then still be, how was Paul guessing? Like, what kind of guesswork does a man do to be like, hey, all this stuff that Christ spoke about, which how somehow he knew Christ spoke about it. Somehow he's jiving with the same message Christ had. He's taking those same Old Testament teachings and prophecies and applying it to those people in that day and age. What what really are the mathematical odds of that being just coincidence? And that's what drives me crazy about, like, for example, Ace Theo's channel. The the guy won't he doesn't understand, right? He's like, I want to stay in Paul, but when you start talking to him about you know how Paul was jiving exactly with Christ, and these old, like, you've got to understand the Old Testament to understand Paul's eschatology. He suddenly, it's like I'm speaking Chinese. You know what I mean? And he's like, he doesn't want to deal with it. He doesn't like that idea, but it's the truth. That's how we can kind of like approach somebody like you who is agnostic and be like, well, let's look at the mathematical probability here, because I'm a super logical person. I'm all about, like, hey, if it don't make dollars, it don't make sense. And it took me um a lot of, I mean, it was all by God's design. But dude, I was an atheist for a long time because I'm looking at the Bible. I'm like, dude, this is ridiculous. Talking about
It's
Jesus.
goofy.
Right. Like, yeah, if you take it literally, you're like, oh, Jesus is coming from heaven, out of heaven on a horse, and the devil, oh, that's the scary man doing all the scary stuff. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't jive with me. But God brought me to a place to where I accepted it, right? But then I found full preterism, and it just was like a light switch going off in my head. I was like, oh my God, yeah, this harmonizes it. This makes it make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at I mean, from my perspective as an agnostic, it was more like, how current rabbinical Jews view the Tanakh is they don't even think, like I told you this earlier, they don't even think like a lot of them don't even think Moses was a real person. They just use it as like as a guideline for like
Yeah, right. As an
things.
allegorical kind of thing.
Yeah, and that was my interest in religion for the first part, for instance, for like cultural and social reasons, because I feel as though like atheism has started to make a pretty terrible case for itself, and I was looking at it from more of that sort of perspective.
That's fair, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's true. There's a lot of atheists that, like, are, they it's gotten to the point where they're basing it on all their presuppositions, and it's just funny because that's what they blame Christians on doing. Well, you're just basing everything on your own presupposition. Well, that's what you're doing too. And atheism is a religion. It is. There's a code that you have to abide by. If you stop abiding by that code, you're no longer part of that religion. You have to it's just goofy because you're believing in scientism, basically. You're like, most atheists are like, I just believe in science. Okay, so that's scientism. It's a religion. If you stop believing in scientism and you move into, like, believing in God, you've just moved from one religion, which is a false religion, into the one true religion, in my purview.
Right. Well, I mean, it depends on what we mean by science, because I don't think I could ever give up a lot of the like physics and some other
Yeah,
stuff like
yeah, no,
that.
but scientism in like, as the actual term, it is it literally has the same core tenets as any religion, as any organized religion. You have to adhere to what scientism spells out, and if you waver from that, you are no longer in that bracket, because it's like, well, at what point is it, like, if you believe in 50% of the science, you're a science, like, you know what I mean, you're in scientism? No, you have to adhere to all of it, right? Otherwise you're just agreeing with things that are observable phenomena in the world. Like, if I drop something, it's going to drop to the ground. They call that gravity. Cool, you can call it whatever you want. It's accepted that it's called gravity, and it's there. Like, you can't deny that it's not there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a lot of the basic stuff I don't think I could ever convince myself out of, but things like, social science, all that sort of, you know, what's the word? Um, like what is it called? The crisis where they don't repeat results, all that new age stuff. I'm not on board.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, essentially what here's what I think personally. I think you are going to turn to Christ, and personally, I think when you do, you're going to be a full preterist. That's what I think, because it's the only sect, quote unquote, or denomination, quote unquote, of Christianity that is going to satiate your need. That's what I think.
Right. Yeah, I was like, I guess I'm in like the same boat as you or where you were, but
Mhm.
there's two giant bullets, I think, against preterism, which is that essentially no one knew of or believed this throughout history. Like it's exceptionally rare. And the second would be that seemingly, if anything is uh, any writings are dated after the Second Temple, then it's sort of it's untenable.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's why I said I'm fine with staying in Paul's writings if need be. I mean, I think I can't. I don't think I've ever seen anybody state that any of Paul's epistles were written post AD 70. So I'm perfectly fine with staying there. And I think there's some like general consensus of at least like the Gospel of Mark being written pre AD 70 as well. So
Mhm.
I would stick with whatever's in the Old Testament and whatever falls in that timeline pre AD 70. That I can definitely work with that because it all adheres to like it's all one cohesive narrative. So for me, it's not a big deal to exclude quote unquote some of the New Testament epistles and things like that. If it's going to be like, well, that was written post 80, 70 type of stuff. So, and as far as for historically speaking, nobody has ever said this, not necessarily true. Josephus in his works, um, in so many words, said that the sign of the Son of Man appeared when that temple fell in because it represented the universe of the Jews. We're talking a rich history of people that dated back at least 1500 years prior to that temple falling. That's a long time for one ethnic group of people to be in that covenantal uh, lifestyle, right? It's like imagine if America fell apart tomorrow. Okay, America's only been around for what, like 300 years, if even. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But it would blow our minds. We'd be like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? There's no America. But imagine 1200, 1500 years of just like repeatedly being beat over the head with the law of Moses. And that's what you did. You eat, drank, breathed, slept the law of Moses. And that temple, boom, falls for a second time. Let's not even talk about the first time, what that was must have been like for them. But now the second time, where the whole city is gone, it's over, Um, but also Irenaeus, who was like an earlier church founder, did say that the day of the Lord did happen in AD 70. Do I think that he had fully fleshed out the idea? Maybe not, but the thought process being there of this was the day of the Lord and it happened when that temple fell, that gives away the farm and the kitchen sink, because once you agree that that was the day of the day of the Son of Man, then it's, yeah, full preterism right there, and that was a long time ago. It just might not be popular, and I still don't get why it's not popular, because I'd tell futurists all the time, okay, let's say Jesus is coming back, right? When you die, do you go to heaven? Let's say you die before he comes back. You're going to heaven? Well, yeah. Then what are we freaking out freaking out about? Like that's the ultimate thing. Like, why are you so caught up and worried about, yeah, I'm gonna be in heaven, but I still need my perfect body. So I really need to be resurrected in my perfect body. Like, what are you in heaven in a half crippled body? Are you like only 50% of what you could be while you're in heaven? And God's like, hey, you're gonna have to deal with this for a while. Don't worry though. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense.
Right. And a couple things. One, I don't have much of a problem with dating a lot of the stuff pre the temple. Really, what's funny is the only thing that I would have a hard time accepting before the second temple is a book that I really don't. think is uh, authentic, anyways, which would be Revelation. That's sort of like my one book that I'm like, oh.
Well,
Everything else, I mean, if you want to put everything else before that, I wouldn't throw up too much of a fight, except for like John. John seems to have been quite late, but
yeah.
yeah, other than that, I don't
What about
really
the
have.
epistles? What about the epistles of John? Like First John, Second John, Third John. What do you?
Could go either way. I'm not gonna die on a hill.
Okay. Well, the reason why I say that is because I just want to say First John verse 2, it says, "And the life was revealed, and we have seen and testify and announce to you the Eonian, the life, which was to the Father and was revealed to us. What we have heard and seen, and we announce it to you also, so that you also have communion with us, and the communion or our communion, yea, ours with you, is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ." What I really want to say is in the first part here, what we have heard and seen, and we announce it to you. If you were to say, okay, First John was written pre AD 70, well, when you look at Revelation, and I'm not saying this is a nail in the coffin by any means, but you can see how this is a cohesive thing, because Christ tells John, or the angel, the messenger of Christ tells John, hence, write what you perceived, and the things which are, and the things which are binding, and to be about to become after these things. So, see what he says here, what you perceived, it's past tense. So, the messenger is telling John, hey, write what you had seen before. And so, what does he do? Well, he writes about what he had seen and heard, right? What he had perceived. And I think that after Revelation is written is absolutely where you get John, because he hadn't written what he had seen before Revelation was written.
Hmm. Well, anyways, this isn't like a either. Like, I don't. I'm not gonna
What,
throw up an. I'll concede this point, but I still don't think Revelation was before
yeah,
Second Temple.
yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, I'm just there are other things that I can go to prove an early writing or an early dating of Revelation. Um, One that I people typically hate, and I don't understand why, but in First Peter, at the end of it, Peter actually says his sign off is the co-outchosen, outcalled in Babylon greets you, and so does my son Mark. So, my contention is Peter is identifying Jerusalem as Babylon, which is how the only way he would have known to do that would be if the epistle of Revelation had been written and circulated prior to Peter dying. Because in my purview, Revelation is what identifies Jerusalem as Babylon. So that's why he references it as Babylon, because he only ever worked out of Jerusalem. That's where his ministry was out of. I've had people be like, "Oh, well, he was in Rome." No, he wasn't. There's no historical evidence that Peter was ever in Rome. Yeah, you've got the St. Peter's Basilica where they claim that's where his remains are, but no. And also, other people have said, no, he actually was in Babylon. And I'm like, Babylon was not a, a kingdom at the time of first century. Like, and even if you want to make the argument of, well, he was in Chaldea, right? Okay, that's fine, but that's still, there's no evidence that he is ever in Chaldea. So um I actually do have to take off though, because I'm going to go to dinner with my wife. But Howdy, I appreciate you hopping on, man. I'll be back on. I'll go live again maybe tomorrow, and we can hash some more stuff out if you're gonna be available. Okay.
All right, cool. Nice seeing you.
Yeah, you too, man. Have a good night.
You too.